Welcome back. Last time we were talking about the causes of climate, which are jet streams, weather fronts, mountains, distance from the coastal region, latitude, seasonal changes, all contribute towards different climates in different areas of the world. Last time we also talked about, do these climatic changes have any effect on organisms? Absolutely. We talked about how leaves, they come out in the springtime or they start to die off in the fall. Animal mating seasons, again, that they're mating at certain times of the year so that their offspring have the best chance of survival during the changing seasons. We talked about bird migrations, how birds migrate from all the way from Canada all the way down to Mexico. And again, that's to find food and also nesting grounds. Would global warming or global climate change have an effect on these organisms? Absolutely. Right? If the seasons were prolonged or stayed the same, it could really disrupt when the offspring are born, which could also cause some problems. It could also affect bird migration, the overconsumption of food in the area, being that they don't know when to leave, or even again plants that they their leaves on longer or they start to take them off sooner for whatever reason, and that could be very bad. We talked about latitude and climate. We know that the effects of latitude, you lay flat, have an effect on the climate. And again, as you go around the equator, it's usually more direct sunlight. So you're getting usually around 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of darkness, as compared to, say, the northern hemisphere. At certain times of the year, you're going to have, upwards to, 10, 12 hours of sunlight, but then it can increase to even past that, up to 14, 16 hours, which is pretty crazy. But on the reverse side, like during the winter, you have a lot less. That it gets dark, right around 4 o'clock, and that can be pretty crazy. But as such, the Earth's surface is heated differently in different areas, which cause different climatic changes and also different biomes or ecosystems. Scientists split the Earth into three zones. You have the tropical, which is 0 to 30, the temperate, which is 30 to 60, and the polar, which is 60 to 90. We typically reside around the 30 to 60. Latitude and climate here again, you can see the picture here. You have the northern part, which is again, we're talking about from that 60 to 90, and then you have the 30 to 60, which is the temperate, and the 0 to 30, which is more of your equator tropical areas. Okay, and that 30 to 30 is a lot of the tropical areas. When you think about it, that's a big swath on the earth. You've got a lot of areas right around here in North America. You've got some parts in South America. You're getting a lot of rainforest. Most all your rainforests will reside between the 30 and 30 latitude marks. Then you have more of your temperates, which is again from 30 to 60 on both sides. And then you have again the polar regions, 60 to 90. So it depends on the sunlight. If these yellow rays represent the sun's rays, you're getting a lot of direct sunlight here. But as you go up here, you're getting less and less, so you're not going to get or receive as much. Now this happens to be in the equinox phase, where the sunlight is hitting the equator directly. So latitude and climate. Latitude affects climate, but is not the only abiotic, non-living factor that affects climate. Other climatic factors include elevation, such as in mountains. We know that mountains can have a big impact. As you go higher up in the mountains, the temperature can change quite drastically. That's why when you look at mountains, sometimes you see the snow on top of it, but yet you're standing down at a lower elevation, and it's nice and sunny, 70 degrees. Well, ice should melt, at 70 degrees, but again, it's not 70 degrees at the top of the mountain. Continental landmass. The bigger the landmass is, it's harder for the ocean currents and air to move across there. So it'll eventually start to cool down. It'll warm up the coastal regions, but the farther inland you go, you're getting less and less heat from the ocean, which again is coming from the equator, heating up those warm waters and air and moving it northward or southward on the planet. Ocean currents, again, those currents exist in the ocean. There's warm currents and there's cold currents. So it depends on where you're at, what kind of air you're going to get. England itself is pretty far north, believe it or not. But as a result, it has a warm ocean current that brings in a lot of warm ocean air, which again heats up England. Now they also have a lot of rain too, which is accompanied with the ocean currents. So if it wasn't for that ocean current, England might be a lot colder. At one time, they believe there was a mini ice age that occurred in England, and that's because they think the ocean current got shut down due to some melting ice, which cooled it off, which inhibited that warm ocean air from coming up. And as a result, England and those areas could no longer make wine because of the growing season. It was much shorter, so the grapes wouldn't do as well. So they switched over to something else, a shorter growing season crop known as wheat and barley, which then therefore they made beer. So there you go, little history for you. So when you look at, say, Mother Russia here, you can see here, this is the over here region. They have a lot of coastal regions over here, but again, they're getting some warm air and stuff like that. But as you go farther inward here, right in here, you're getting a lot of cooler temperatures. Over here, you've got some ocean currents bringing in warm air, much, much warmer. This area right through here is very similar soil type as what we'd find in the Midwest, so which is ideal for growing crops, corn, soybeans, and things like that. However, there's a big old landmass blocking those warm ocean currents from bringing all that warm air. So the growing season here is much, much colder. And as such, they can't grow the typical corn, soybeans, and stuff like that. If Russia could, they would definitely outcompete us because of their sheer landmass and size, that they have all that wonderful soil. But again, temperature plays a big role in crop production, and they just don't have the temperatures. Here in the United States, as you can see, again, here's the Midwest. Lots of corn, soybeans, wheat, and stuff all grown right in here. But again, look the distance from the coastal regions. We have warm air being brought up here through the coastline. We have some through the Gulf. And when you think about when we get rain and stuff here in Missouri, that warm air is being pushed up right through here. It comes cycling through like Texas and Oklahoma, clips Kansas, comes across and goes this way. And when you think about the cold temperatures, they tend to come from up here and they swoop across here through Nebraska and the South Dakotas, and then go across and then clip on up this way towards New York. So those are the weather fronts that you typically see. So next time you're watching the weather map or the radar map, watch the patterns of the storms. They usually follow a jet stream or current. Okay, but being we are closer to the coastal regions, it brings in that warm air, and we can have longer growing seasons and grow all those wonderful crops. Major land biomes. Biomes are classified primarily according to the characteristics of their plants. Temperature and precipitation also play a major role. Animal species are also important characteristics of biomes, but they're not necessarily the sole reason. The plants determine what animals can actually live there. Okay, so climate determines the plants, and the plants determine the animals. As you look at this map, it kind of breaks down many of the major biomes that we're going to discuss here in a few seconds. But again, I want you to look at 30 to 0 and 0 to 30 here. You look what's in between there, and you find a lot of the tropical rainforest. Very rarely do you see the tropical rainforest poke outside of these latitude lines here. The savannas, you also see them usually within those 30 to 30 marks. The deserts, now this is where it gets interesting. Deserts usually follow these 30-degree latitudes, if you look, right in there, that swath. And that's usually around the Tropic of Capricorn and Tropic of Cancer. They just tend to hit right in there. And the question is, why is that happening? And that has to do with wind currents and ocean currents. So as the sun heats up the water here, it will cycle up into the atmosphere, drop a bunch of water, and then as it cycles through, it's out of water, and by the time it gets to that 30-degree latitude mark, there's no rain to drop. So it becomes a desert right across here, which is kind of cool. So you're seeing the same patterns emerge. Now, if Australia was down a little farther south, it might be a little different. If it's a little farther north, it would look more like the islands out here. So pretty cool. So let's talk about some of these. The tundra, 15 to 20 centimeters a year of precipitation. You've got negative 34 degrees Celsius to 12 degrees Celsius. Now remember, 0 degrees Celsius is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and 100 degrees Celsius is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And to give you a rough estimate, around 21 degrees Celsius is around 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is definitely a lot colder than 72 degrees. So not typically what you want per se. To wear shorts out in the weather there. You got short grasses, shrubs, and lichens. So not a lot of things growing big and tall here. You got things like caribou, polar bear, birds, insects, wolves, salmon, and trout. Now, we have birds here in the Midwest. We have insects, and there's not necessarily wolves, but there's coyotes. So we have a few of these animals that can overlap their ranges quite a bit, but not necessarily all of them. South of the polar ice caps in the northern hemisphere, the permafrost, which is the ground is permanently frozen, so it never really truly dethaws, which makes it very difficult for large plant life like trees to grow in there. So trying to get their roots in there. A lot of these things will grow on the surface where it thaws out just a little bit so it can get some of them roots going. But typically you just don't see a lot. And this is what the tundra would look like. Again, not a lot of big trees, but you see some mountain ranges and stuff in the background there, but a lot of little shrubs, lichens, mosses, and things like that. If you look at the map, you'll notice it's way up there in the top there. And down south, it'd be like right about in there. So, in Antarctica, but it's just one giant frozen rock. You have the Boreal Forest, which is 30 to 84 centimeters precipitation a year. And if you're thinking, well, how much is that really? Well, remember, a meter stick has 100 centimeters on it, which is about 3 feet. So you're talking almost, 3 feet of rain overall, or 36 inches. So not too bad for a year precipitation. Not in one day, a year. You got negative 54 degrees Celsius to 21 degrees Celsius. That's not a negative, it's just dash. So 21. So we're getting close to the 70-degree mark for the highs. Spruce and fir trees, deciduous trees, which we have those here in the Midwest. Small shrubs. You have birds, moose, beavers, deer, wolverines, mountain lions, some of which we have, again, Canada, Northern Europe, and Asia. They have longer summers, no permafrost, which means trees can start to grow. And that's what we see there. If you look around here, you can see a whole bunch of trees, different types of them. Now, these are not necessarily completely deciduous trees, but there are some out there. As you look on the map here, you can see that's part of Alaska, Canada. It's even coming down into United States here, and it's got these weird little fingers that trickle down in here. And the reason for that, when you think about it, is they're higher elevations. They're in the mountains. So again, mountains play a role in, again, the climate. You look at the temperate forest here. This is something that we're getting into in our region. 75 to 150 centimeters a year, so over, again, 36 inches of precipitation. Negative 30 to 30, so we're starting to see, yes, we're getting around the 80, 85-degree range here for some highs, even approaching the 90s here. Average temperature range, oak, beech, and maple trees, so we have some of those. Squirrels, rabbits, skunks, birds, deer, foxes, and black bears. We don't necessarily have black bears directly in our area, but there are some down south of us. South of the Boreal Forest in North America, Eastern Asia, Australia, and Europe. So we're starting to encompass quite a few areas with this temperate forest. Well-defined seasons, hot summers, cold winters. Now that sounds like us for sure. So this is what they look like, and you can see those deciduous trees, the leaves are changing, representing fall. So we're going to see a plethora of colors out there. And you look on the map, that's about where we are. Starting to get a lot of the eastern United States, a lot of Europe, over there by China again. So China has a lot of temperate forest like we do, and even Japan over there. Parts of Australia and New Zealand down here. Temperate woodland and shrubland. The temperate woodland and shrubland have 38 to 100 centimeters a year of average precipitation. 10 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius, so we're starting to get a little warmer now. Evergreen shrubs, corn oaks, foxes, jackrabbits, birds, bobcats, coyotes, lizards, snakes, and butterflies. You're around the Mediterranean Sea, the west coast of North and South America, and South Africa, including Australia. So again, it doesn't look like much, but there's definitely different areas. Way out there in California, the Mediterranean has a lot of that. This little sliver down here in Australia, down here by South Africa, that little tip there, and also down here by Chile. So there you go, and that's what it's looking like. Now, another interesting fact was, if you look at this stuff right here, it kind of looks like them old Western movies. And believe it or not, a lot of the old Western movies were called spaghetti Westerns. And they were called spaghetti Westerns because they were filmed in Italy. Yeah, so the Wild Wild West in some of those really old Western movies were not the desert area down here in the United States. They were actually Italy. So there you go, spaghetti Westerns. Temperate grassland. This is also what we have, 50 to 89 centimeters a year precipitation. That includes rain, snow, all sorts of things. Negative 40 degrees Celsius to 38. So now we're getting up in the 90-degree range there. Grasses and herbs, gazelles, we don't have any of those, bisons, horses, lions, deer, mice, and coyotes, foxes, wolves, birds, quails, snakes, grasshoppers, and spiders. So again, it doesn't mean you have to have all of these things. They're just animals that do exist in a biome across the world. North and South America, Asia, Africa, and Australia. As you look, that's about the Midwest, spanning all the way up into Canada, the Dakotas, Nebraska, all the way down to Texas, and spots out there west. You got some down here, and you got a lot of going on right here in Asia, parts of Russia and stuff like that. And again, like I said, Russia, they have a lot of that fertile soil just like us that can grow crops. However, look at all the landmass around this that the warm air stops right about here and it just doesn't reach there. If they had the warm air again, they could grow some serious crops. The desert, 2 to 26 centimeters average precipitation, low between -18 to -10 degrees Celsius, high between 20 and 49 degrees Celsius. So, like, wait a minute, that's a weird temperature range. You got really cold to really hot. If you've never been to the desert, during the day it can be like 110, and at night it can be below freezing. And when I went out to the Grand Canyon, that's exactly what happened. During the day, it was 110. That night, it got well below freezing, and we all we had was a tent and some blankets, so it got really cold that night. But again, deserts, there's not a lot of vegetation out there due to the low precipitation. Therefore, it doesn't hold as much heat throughout the night. So when you have just bare rocks, the rocks dissipate that heat rather quickly, and it gets really cold. So you have cacti, Joshua trees, succulents, lizards, bobcats, birds, tortoise, rats, antelope, desert toads. Every continent except Europe, which is kind of crazy. Hot days, cool nights, and very, very dry. As you look, we have some here in North America, South America, Africa, Australia, and then you look here, you've got Asia, but Europe is just lacking. And you think, well, what about Antarctica? Even though it's got ice, keep in mind there's not a lot of rainfall, so it's kind of like a giant desert. The ice caps are. Just the ice tends to freeze down there, so they're not necessarily getting a whole lot of precipitation. It's just frozen down there. So they're kind of like deserts too, just not the hot, dry ones you think of. Tropical savanna, you have 50 to 130 centimeters of average precipitation, 20 to 30 degrees Celsius average. So it doesn't get too cold. It's like 70 is the lowest almost. And 30s around like 80, 85, 90 degrees. So, yeah, not too bad. Grasses and scattered trees, lions, hyenas, cheetahs, elephants, giraffes, zebras, birds, yeah, and insects. So you're thinking movie-wise, it'd be like The Lion King if you ever watched that. Africa, South America, and Australia. So this is what the savanna would look like. A few scattered trees, whatnot, big open plains for things to hide. Easy for lions to hide out in the grass, stalk their prey. We don't have a whole lot of that here in the United States because there is none. We just don't have the warm temperatures. But if you look, a lot of these tend to border the deserts. So if you look, here's a giant desert here, the Sahara Desert, and it has this little swath here, and then you have the tropical rainforest all up in here. And in Australia, you have a big desert, and it's just this little swath right here. Then you got some lush ground up here. But yeah, pretty cool. You got the tropical seasonal forest, which is greater than 200 centimeters a year average precipitation. So we're talking, um, again, 100 centimeters is a meter stick. So when you stack two of those together, you're talking about some serious precipitation. All right. You got 20 degrees Celsius to 25, so the temperature doesn't get too low again. Deciduous and evergreen trees, orchids, mosses, elephants, tigers, monkeys, koalas, rabbits, frogs, spiders. You're talking about Africa, Asia, Australia, South and Central America. So I didn't have a little map picture of that, but this was a kind of an area, a picture I looked up online. This is supposed to be some awesome tree that's like the tree of life. So yes, it looks pretty awesome when you think about how big this thing is. Very massive. You can see the people stand next to it. Tropical rainforest, 200 to 1,000 centimeters a year, average precipitation. 24 degrees Celsius, 27 degrees Celsius, average temperature range. Broadleaf evergreens, bamboo, sugarcane, chimpanzees, Bengal tigers, elephants, orangutans, bats, toucans, sloths, and cobras. Central and South America, South Asia, West Africa, and Northeast Australia. Hot and moist all year round, not seasonal. So here is what the tropical rainforest would look like, just as you had seen in documentaries and TV shows. And you look again, look at all these areas with the rainforest. And again, it's between 30 and 30. That's where most of them reside, which is kind of cool. You got Madagascar right down there, all the tropical rainforest over here, like the Congo in Africa. You've got the Brazilian jungle over here. You got India, which those some tigers and stuff out there. Uh, Indonesia. You got Australia there with some tropical stuff, and even down here in parts of Mexico. If you look closely in the photo, you can see two red glowing eyes. That's the predator. And there's Arnold Schwarzenegger down there at the bottom hiding in the mud. Other terrestrial areas, you have mountains. An increase in elevation is like an increase in latitude. Again, as we saw in that previous slide there, that some of those forests were creeping down farther than what they should have, and that's due to the elevation because of the mountains. The polar regions border the tundra on the northern sides, cold all year long, covered by snow and ice. Animals typically live along the ocean to get their food from the ocean because there's no plant life really inward. It's just all snow and ice. So it makes it very difficult for any organism to actually reside in these areas because there's no food. You got to have food, just as we talked about in the trophic pyramids. You got to have producers. So if there's no producers, you got to live where there are animals, at least in the ocean. And there's a lot of aquatic life in the ocean. All right, so that was it for today. Next time we'll talk about the aquatic ecosystems, including limnology and the marine ecosystems. So if you have any questions, I'm always available via email, so just send them out and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for tuning in, guys.